Jay Gabler, Duluth News Tribune arts and entertainment reporter, back with another special edition of the DNT Minute. My front row seat column this week is about my first ever visit to the John Beargrease Sled Dog Marathon. And I'll preface this with a little personal story. When I was a kid living in Duluth, one day I was sad. I don't even remember about what, but I was very sad. My mom was trying everything she could think of to cheer me up. And at one point she says, "Oh, well, you know, the Beargrease dogs are about to leave. Do you want to go see the sled dogs run?" And I was kind of like laughing and crying at the same time in my memory, because I thought it was just like, it was so wonderful for my mom just try so hard to cheer me up. But I was kind of laughing at the same time, thinking like, why would you ever think, Mom, that I would care about sled dogs? Well, here I am, a few decades later, in Grand Marais. That is what this week's column is all about. I'm not sure exactly what I expected to find at my first visit to a John Beargrease Sled Dog Marathon checkpoint, but it wasn't a guy snoozing on a couch in the light of a leg lamp. Yes, a leg lamp, wearing a high heel and fishnet stocking, just like in A Christmas Story. Skyport Lodge has a matched pair of leg lamps, one downstairs in a game room, one upstairs at the bar. The game room was turned into a logistics center on Monday for the lodge's role as an overnight Beargrease checkpoint, but I arrived early. I arrived around 3:30 p.m., and the first dog teams wouldn't arrive for another 7 hours. The volunteers who had staffed the checkpoint were just arriving. One coordinator introduced himself as Lloyd Howdyarvy, common spelling. When the other volunteers chuckled at my confused silence, Howdyarvy ribbed me. "You're not from around here, are you?" Well, yes and no. Duluth, which is itself a northern outpost from the Twin Cities perspective, suddenly felt very far south from our viewpoint on the eastern end of Devil Track Lake off the Gunflint Trail. When I returned to the lodge after dark, the brilliant stars overhead were amply absorbing, aside from the seasonal spectacle of sled dog teams running across the frozen lake to clock in on shore and get a little R&R on the nearby airstrip. Wait, airstrip? That's right. Skyport's name doesn't just come from its relative proximity to the sky. Clarence J. Krotz, a World War II aviator, built a dirt airstrip and seaplane base on the site in the 1940s. It served as the official Cook County airport until 1996, when the present airport was built about 3/4 of a mile north. By the time the dogs reached Skyport, late Monday night into early Tuesday morning, they'd run over 220 miles in under 2 days. The site's volunteers, who would ultimately number in the dozens, agreed that the signal feature of Skyport is the long, visible approach across the lake. Howdyarvy said, "You can see them coming from about 5 miles down the lake because you see each musher's headlamp. When they get a little closer, you see the blinking red light on the lead dog." When the teams finally started to arrive, with Ryan Anderson then in the lead, I gaped at the surreal spectacle. With the mushers' ultra-bright headlamps blazing, each approaching team at first looked at the apparition from the movie poster for The Thing. Eventually, the running dogs, breathing hard in the sub-zero temperature, became visible in a rolling vapor cloud. All in utter silence, except for the groaning of the ice sheet and, gradually, the patter of the dogs' feet. Then came the mushers' cries and the cheers of the crowd. "Good dog!" people would yell. "Good dog! Good dog!" If there was one thing about Beargrease that did not surprise me, it was the preponderance of good dogs. Teams of veterinarians were on hand to check the dog's health, and when I left at midnight, they were reporting only good things. Jonathan L. Boz said, "Everyone's looking great." Great? Despite having just run along frozen trails for hundreds of miles in the kind of temperatures that inspire people to toss pots of boiling water and watch the droplets become instant snow? Absolutely. Caitlin Washburn, another vet, said, "These dogs train so much, and they're so happy to do what they do. It's almost an emotional experience the first time you see it, seeing the passion in these dogs." There were, I discovered, very porous boundaries among the different roles at Beargrease, from mushers to spectators. Many of the people I spoke with at Skyport had mushing experience, some very recently. "I ran the first leg of the Beargrease 120 this year," said Billy Thompson, cradling an infant as she watched the teams advance on a GPS monitor. "My little one ran the Cub Run this year too," she added. She was referring to another young child of hers who was still up at midnight due, Thompson said, to FOMO. Thompson's mother, a Skyport checkpoint coordinator, pitched in with childcare throughout the night. We have always been heavily involved with Beargrease, Thompson said of her family. We've always been the mushers, and then we wanted to jump into the volunteer aspect, but usually we'll see volunteers who suddenly become mushers. Once you jump into the world, you fall in love with it. Love seemed a useful word to describe the motivation of these volunteers, some of whom had not had much more shut-eye than the mushers. Dee Herta said, "I'm probably 2 hours sleep since 5 o'clock Sunday morning." Remember, this is getting to be midnight on Monday. Herta said she was, quote, "tired, but caffeinated." Herta explained that, "I work from home, so this is how I meet people and make new friends. We all have one thing in common. We love the races, we love the dogs, we love the mushers." You've heard of fantasy football. Did you know there's fantasy mushing? I didn't. Herta said, "Who are these handlers working with? Who is their mentor? Whose dogs are they running?" She was listing some of the variables that she takes into consideration when she drafts her fantasy mushing teams. Handlers, I learned, are key members of a sled dog retinue. Some liken themselves to car race pit crews. Others say there's really no comparison. Tony Mai, an experienced musher who was working as a handler in a utility role, said, "Each musher is different. In past years, I've done as much as making sure every meal is ready, feeding dogs. One of the handlers makes sure they're up after a rest, get going." Handlers, who generally assist mushers at checkpoints, also help with the booties. The booties? Referencing the dog's paws, Mai explained, "Especially in this cold, they wear a bootie every run. When they come in, because they have a Velcro that wraps around the wrist, they have to be taken off because otherwise it can cut circulation off. When they're running, it's fine. Once they stop, they need them off pretty quick. Also, the dogs only cool through their feet." Well, in just a few hours, I was learning a lot. Stephanie Bartelt was grinning as she stood around a roaring fire near the dog's approach, told me, "You're going to love it, so be careful. It's such a big sport, but a small world." I recognized Jake Way, an Ely musher, from his Chili Dogs jacket. I'd previously written about Chili Dogs and a sled dog-powered band that they had put together. He told me, "It's like a family reunion." He gestured out to the dogs running across the ice and he said, "These dogs have this lifestyle. We are their caretakers." As one dog team yelped with delight at the imminent prospect of snacks, Way explained that just because the dogs live to race, that doesn't mean they don't appreciate the pleasures of a good checkpoint. He said, "It's like when you go on vacation. It's also nice to come home." Inside the lodge's Raven Rock Bar and Grill upstairs, Madonna's Papa Don't Preach played on the jukebox. Several people perched on stools, some stepping out onto the deck to take a look when dog teams approached. Rochelle and Corey Christensen, who've owned Skyport Lodge since 2016, stood by. Rochelle Christensen told me about the annual Beargrease stop. "It's a special 24 hours. Very fast, we become friends with the Sawbillies, they call themselves." That's in reference to Sawbill, an earlier Beargrease checkpoint on the Temperance River. Rochelle Christensen herself was not planning to pull an all-nighter. She said, "I'm a mother of 2 who have school in the morning." But she said she and her husband made sure the volunteers were set up with coffee and hot water. She said, "We'll be back at it at 4 a.m. tomorrow. Corey prepares home-cooked food for breakfast." The volunteers also had cookies and donut holes on hand for overnight sustenance, keeping an ear to the radio and an eye to the teams taking rests along the runway just outside the lodge. I was glad to hear even the well-seasoned Mai acknowledge how cold it was up on the runway, where wind whipped through the darkness and made my rabbit fur hat feel like tissue paper. The mushers I saw had trailers and support vehicles for shelter as needed. Even as volunteers cycled in and out of the cold, occasionally crashing for naps on chairs or even the bare floor, there was a sustained, if restrained, this is Minnesota after all, sense of exhilaration. At one point, Elbaz asked, "Should we do yoga?" Patty Schlater, who was serving as the checkpoint's race timer alongside her husband Dick, said, "It's so good. It's really fun." She and her husband were still reeling from witnessing the marathon's dramatic start. She remembered, "They're all just laying there, quiet and calm." She's talking about the dogs. She said, "As soon as they're put into their harnesses, they just pull." Dave Ruska, one of the judges stationed at Skyport, said, "These teams are flying. There's a lot of good teams out there, so it's going to be an interesting finish." Just after midnight, as I prepared to leave, Howdy Yarvey and other volunteers were calculating the amount of time remaining before every musher would have checked in at Skyport. They estimated it would be at least another few hours. Howdy Arby just smiled and said, "That's not bad at all." He said, "We know what we signed up for." Next week in Front Row Seat, I'll write about the End of the Road Film Festival, a new film festival coming to Ely. And in Shortcuts, I will be writing about a book that just made it to Duluth about a ship that never did. It's next week at DuluthNewsTribune.com. I'm Jay Gabler.